Product management and product marketing have always been strategic roles for any organization in the business of creating and successfully launching products or productized services predictably. With several product companies in India who have gone global and most global multinationals wanting to launch their products for emerging markets, the product management role and career path has received a renewed attention in India in the recent years. Today's webinar will guide us on product management as a career path in India. We are delighted to have Mr. Pinkesh Shah, CEO at Adaptive Marketing Solutions Private Limited, as our expert speaker today. Mr. Pinkesh is a Silicon Valley executive who has been a product management practitioner for the last 14 years in US. Recently, he was the Global Vice President of Product Management at McAfee BU, now acquired by Intel. Gentlemen, the presentation will continue for 45 minutes and you can ask your questions by typing in the chat pane available. So, without further delay, I request Mr. Pinkesh to continue with the session.
Let's get started the webinar now.
Okay, great. Hey, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here, and looks like we've got a few folks already signed in. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Pinkesh Shah, and I'm currently in Bangalore, India. So I think the topic that we wanted to talk about and hopefully discuss is I'd like it to be very interactive. Certainly, I'm going to miss the face-to-face audience that I'm more used to when I do workshops and teach at colleges, but over a webinar it's going to be obviously hard, so would certainly expect interruptions, strongly encourage it actually, whenever you have a question or a topic that we would like to discuss. So why don't we first get started with a little bit of quick introduction. I think the lady at Techgig did a very good job summarizing it fairly well, so I'll skip a few of these details. But at a high level, I'm a hardcore techie. I've been an engineer in the software space for years before I turned into product management. My bachelor's, my master's from Purdue University have all been in computer science. And specifically my domain expertise is security. So I've been in the security space for the last 14 years. And I'll talk a little bit about it as well as to how I kind of turned that into what I call an accidental product manager early in the career path. And obviously since that I haven't looked back. And this is relevant for probably a lot of audience that I was given an impression that it's going to be primarily a lot of technology folks on the call today. So I can share some of the things that you have to learn and probably unlearn if product management is on your mind from a career perspective. Our passion, we started Adaptive Marketing, and our passion is really very simple. We want to transform the technology talent that we have, especially in emerging markets and countries like India, and turn them into global product leaders. Not just from a mindset perspective, but also from a skill set and the ability to apply some of the same best practices that we're otherwise used to or exposed to in U.S., but sometimes it's not very often practiced or found or understood even here in India. So that's kind of our passion, and so this topic is perfectly aligned to that. So that's a little bit about me. If you look at what we do, we started this company primarily in California, and then we started our operations here in Bangalore last year. And we see ourselves in the India operations especially as a finishing school for product professionals, project managers, business analysts, user designers, folks who essentially work in assisting or helping some part of the product lifecycle, and how do we kind of groom them to more finished product professionals. These are some of our practice areas. We tend to do a lot of work in India, especially around user design, user experience, because it's a very integral part of the product and the product management process that I'm going to try and highlight based on what we've seen in the industry practiced fairly well. Adaptive is also now accredited by AIPMM, so we've started offering a certification for product management in India for the first time now. Okay, so that's kind of a little bit about the firm and myself. Like they said in the introduction, I've had the fortune of actually working in India about 3 years ago when I was still the Vice President for Product Management at McAfee in the U.S. To start the product management function here. And so I'll try to narrate some of the ground challenges that I've had to face in hiring product managers in India. And obviously a lot has changed since that experience 3 years ago, because as we're now speaking and meeting a lot of product professionals, both aspiring and senior product managers in India. Things have obviously changed and advanced quite a bit. So I can narrate to some and share some experiences if you guys have questions on that as well. So what I thought is I'll try to structure this fairly quickly into 5 macro topics. First is, it's important to talk about career path, but it's first important to even understand, what is product management? If you ask this question to a couple different people in a room, and depending on the day and the time of the day, you will probably get different answers. And rightfully so, because every company has a slightly different nuance of what they understand and believe and practice under this role called product management. So what I'll try to do is I'll give you a structured view that we've tried to put together based on best practices in the industry as to what is the role of a product manager, what do they actually do, what areas of skills and what areas of practice do they actually need to spend their time on, and then we'll start talking a little bit about the career path. I'll give a very easy context from a career path perspective if you know the bigger picture as to what they're supposed to do. So the moderator, are you going to be asking questions on behalf of folks, or should I be monitoring that here as well?
The questions would be shared with you. You can see them in the questions window.
Okay, perfect. Do you prefer I wait till the end or keep on answering as they come along?
If there are any contextual questions, it can be answered.
Okay, super. So it looks like we've already got a few questions, and I'll park them till I get to that slide. Ravi Shankar asked a very good question that, look, how do you evolve from a business analyst or a project manager to a product manager? In fact, we see this as a very typical pattern, and let me set the context first, Ravi, and then I'll hopefully I would have answered your question by then, but if I haven't, I'll come back to it. Okay, so with that, hopefully by the end of this next few minutes, 45 minutes or so, you'll be able to, in my opinion, at the very least, at the very minimal, answer this question about, hey, now that I know what product management is, what it looks like in India, what's the ground reality of things operating here, do I have what it takes to become a great product manager? And let me tell you, to be very candid, not everybody does. While a lot of people have the aspirations and intentions to become a product manager, actually becoming an operating one is not an easy job for the reasons that I'm going to share with you here very quickly as well. But hopefully you'll be able to learn that and map that for yourself at the end of this conversation. Second is, okay, now that I am on this path, either I'm already a product manager or I want to get on that path, where is the gap? Hopefully you'll be able to answer this by the end of this webinar as well. Specifically more actionable plan as to these are the areas you need to focus on and kind of almost do a gap analysis on yourself to where you need to get to. So hopefully these are the two main takeaways for you at the end, besides a lot of informational and educational things. Hopefully this is more actionable for each one of you who's joining here. So what happens? What happens when you, first of all, don't have a good product manager? And we'll get into the definition of who the product manager is, but it's very important to understand the effect of not having one, or a good one. So the first thing that happens is this. And obviously the kid is not happy, with this tricycle because, the engineering guys built the bicycle that they were asked to build. Of course, the engineering guys probably didn't have the right customer context. And so that's what happens when you don't have the customer context, when you don't have a great product manager who's bringing that customer context, who's bringing the actual market problems that we're trying to solve, and then the context in which the solution needs to be presented back, this is what happens, right? So this is time and time again we've seen, and this is industry agnostic, by the way, whether it's high tech, whether it's pharma, building the wrong product is almost a fallacy that happens in almost every industry, because a lack of product management vision or a lack of great product managers driving the process. The second thing that happens is this. Now, this is a picture that you probably have seen a couple times. Boy, every time I see this picture, I still get amazed. This is an actual jug that was made in the 17th century, I think in northern part of Europe, and it was made with the best porcelain, right? So this was like the best material ever invented. So while structurally it was one of the innovative things to do, highly, highly unusable for obvious reasons that you can see. So that's the second disaster that happens in companies and products where you don't have a good product manager who's leading the process of productizing. You build something that's fairly innovative. You build something that's fairly perhaps inventive from an engineering perspective, from a technology perspective, but certainly fails to bring the delight, certainly fails to bring the wow factor from a design experience, from an experience perspective, and it certainly leaves a bad taste. And this is also true for just about any other industry that you can think of, right? So that's kind of second peril that happens when you don't have that. Now this is the third one, and this one I see a lot more in Asia than I see in Europe and US, where we try to over-engineer our products, right? So this little picture is a funny picture because you almost have like an 8.5. The half guy is on suspension mode, as you can see on the bike, so he's not taking a seat. So almost 8.5 guys riding this bike, and while that sounds funny, if you actually introspect and look at your own products, you will probably find something like this. Too many features. In fact, so many features that either the customer is completely confused how to use it, or even the engineers forgot that, oh, by the way, we had added this thing in the last release, right? So we somehow get into this feature war just because the competitive pressure, sales pressure, and there's this notion of more is better. In fact, if you look at companies who've done it completely on the flip side, companies like Apple, it's completely the other way around. I mean, if you look at the Harvard case study written on Apple when they released the iPhone, they have only 32% of all features that all existing smartphones had at that time were available in an iPhone. And yet, obviously, it's a blockbuster product. So the correlation between more features and success is proving continuously to be wrong. And so this is what happens, again, when you don't prioritize it, when you don't have the right business value attached to your roadmap and your requirements for the roadmap. So these are some of the things that you might have seen as a direct consequence of many reasons, but certainly a direct consequence of not having a good product management process as well as a good product manager at the helm of it. So what is this product management process? And this is one thing that I'd like to make a clear distinction in the minds of everyone who's here, which is, the word product management is sometimes misinterpreted because the word product management is used for the productizing process or the product management process. And it's also used for the individuals or the roles or titles of people who play the role of a product manager, and those two are different. And I'm going to try and make a clear distinction between the product management process, which is different than the product management role. So what is this product management process? At the very core of this, there are 5 phases, no matter what your product is. Everything from a soap all the way to a rocket, everything from a mobile app, everything from a small widget all the way to a complex ERP software application. They essentially have 5 phases when you look at the product lifecycle management. And as you go from idea to building a sustainable business. First is understanding value. Now this is the most important part, often the ignored part, where you're trying to go and apply lots of formal, informal market research techniques to figure out really what is the customer problem you're trying to solve. What is the difference between the customer needs and the customer want, right? What do they really want versus what are they asking for? There's this whole notion of customers don't know what they want, and literally that is true in some cases, because they are communicating to you in their own language, and that might not be the correct way of understanding the problem. It's up to the product manager to really understand the value of what you're trying to build. And this is hard, but with the right experience and the right exposure, this is the most important reason why products succeed actually. It's not necessarily the engineering innovation, it is the latching of the what we call product market fit. So getting the right fit for a problem that is actually worth solving. Not all problems are worth solving, obviously. Even though it is a legitimate problem, people might not have the right appetite to pay for it. People might have, customers might have the appetite, but they might not have the budget to pay for it. So obviously all of those have to be factored in when you figure out which market problem you want to solve. The second part is something that I find a lot of product managers in India especially are fairly good at it, which is the whole process of creating the value, creating the products, defining the requirements of the products, in some cases, helping get a kind of a mock-up, a skeleton, the architecture side of it, right, all of those. So that's kind of the defining of the product, so creating value. The third is you're capturing the value. This is all about how do you monetize what you've built? Now, monetization doesn't mean you have to always have a price tag. If you look at the emerging models where everything from Google Mail to LinkedIn, they're all following a free model, right? So, in fact, the economy in the business model is called freemium. You start with free, and at some point, some customers start using it, get used to it, and love it so much that they start paying for it, which means they become a premium customer. And so that becomes a freemium business model, free to premium, freemium. So how do you capture value? This is a very important element, and it's quite evolved actually. It's very different than what it used to be even 3 years ago, and I bet it will be very different 2 years from now than it is today. It's a highly evolving space on how to capture, how to monetize. The fourth part of the productizing process is obviously communicating the value. And this is where you've built the product. Now, how do you message that right? How do you brand that? How do you position that? How do you use the right channel of communication? Back in those days, almost just 5 years ago, there were classic ways to communicate. You have your TV, your billboards, your commercial, radios, and so on and so forth. Now there are 3,000 social media channels alone. To be able to talk to it. I mean, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, these are just the big ones, but there are several small ones. So how do you find the right channel to communicate the message that you have? The last one, which is a very important one, is the whole experience design, and this is where delivering value comes in, right? So you've built the product, but you don't have an ecosystem to take that product and to deliver that amazing value that you've built, that you've created, this is what we call the last mile, right? So a lot of products fail actually in this phase of the productizing process, primarily because they didn't either pay attention or just roll the die and hoped that everybody is just gonna figure out a way to get it. And this is actually becoming more so crucial in new business models like software as a service, where you're directly reaching out to the end customer without an intermediary or without a channel. And so how you deal with that delivering value is something directly falls back in the product manager's bucket. So this easy to follow, obviously difficult and sometimes not very predictable to exercise, but this straightforward process is what we call the value management process. A lot of people call it the productizing process, value management process. But this, in a sense, is your product management process. Understanding value, creating value, capturing value, communicating value, and finally delivering that value. Right? So that's kind of product management process. Now, the product management role, and again, I'm using the word role and not title. Title in India are highly creative, and I'm being very polite when I say that. I mean, I've seen some very amazing and yet very crazy titles when it comes to different folks that I meet. So titles are very creative all around the world, but especially in India. But that's not what I'm referring to. You might be doing a product management role irrespective of what you are being called as a title on your business card. Right? So I'm referring this to the product management role. And so that is the guy who's essentially responsible to orchestrate this entire process, to work with a cross-functional team to make this product management process a success. That is the role of a product manager. Right? There's obviously a cross-functional team. One person or one team cannot do, one set of product managers cannot do anything in the world. You need a supporting team and you need a cross-functional team, which we'll talk about as well, but this is the crux of a product management role versus a product management process. It's important to keep that distinction when you communicate, and it depends on the context of your communication. So let's take a look at maybe more crisper definition. Now that we understand the product management process or the productizing process, what is the role of a product manager? So the one-line definition and there are many such definitions out there. So certainly this is not the only one. This is the one that we believe is the more true reflection of reality in today's world, which is, finding compelling. And compelling because at the end of the day, you have to pick those problems to solve. You have to build those products that actually have a real problem, a real need that somebody's willing to pay for, somebody's willing to adopt, somebody's willing to use. So that's the compelling part. So finding compelling, competitive, and profitable solutions to market problems. The key word here is market problems and not customer problems. And this is one caution that I would like to talk about, especially those who are in the role of business analysts or project managers. We often get caught into one customer requirement or few customer requirements. And so it depends on your industry. There's always an exception, but more often than not, that's a dangerous thing to do when you're building a product. That model works great for services, where you have to please each individual customer individually. And because they're perhaps a big paying customer, you might not have a choice but to go listen to that and kind of do what they want. But that's still a more service way of doing things. A product way of doing things is figuring out what does the broad market want. Because that's where the non-linear scale comes in. That's where you can make the same software, burn the CD for 10 cents and charge $1 million for it to the next big customer, right? That's the scale that comes in if you're building a true product. So market problems are very important as opposed to customer problems. So make that distinction in your mind as well as you play the role or as you aspire to get in one of these product management roles. And at the end of the day, all of your solutions could be solving real problems, but at the end of the day, they have to deliver delight. Especially in today's world, customers' bar is very high. Every time there's an innovative product, the bar goes high in the customer's mind. So you have to really delight that end customer with whatever solution you are designing or delivering. And that's the role of a product manager. So let me pause and take a few questions to see if, oh, wow, we have a big roster already. Okay, so Satyam is talking about, what kind of educational background do you need? So I'll cover that technical side versus the management side. I think Vijay Balkwade is asking about career path. Okay, so we'll get to those questions in a little bit as well. Okay, great. Uh, so that's the definition of the product manager. Now, what does the product manager generally entail in terms of a day-to-day life, right? So I'm trying to give you a ground reality of how their world should work or should operate. 50% of the time, generally speaking, we want our product managers to be facing with the customer, understanding the market, talking to prospects, interviewing people, looking at the segment of the customers you're trying to understand the problem, right? So that's the biggest lion's share of your time that needs to go to deal with and talk to and interact with the customers, the real market. The other two stakeholders or teams, if you will, from an interlock is one is internal, and engineering is usually your biggest stakeholder because you're working with them to define requirements, to give them the context of the requirements. If you're an agile, following an agile methodology, then you're obviously having product owners who sit in your Scrum meetings or your agile meetings and your stand-up meetings and kind of help them with the delivery on a weekly or on every iteration basis, right? So there's a lot more hand-holding happening. So engineering is definitely one of your most important stakeholders, but there's others as well in the company. Because remember, we looked at the productizing process, which means it's everything from understanding value, creating value, capturing value, communicating value, and then finally delivering value. So you can't just always be stuck at creating value. That's a myopic view. It's a very short-sighted view of product management to just focus on requirements, right? And that very well might be in your early stage of your career path. There's nothing wrong with it, but your horizons need to be widened from there. You obviously have external stakeholders beyond customers, and these are your partners, your analysts, your channels, your suppliers. Depending on which industry you're in, sometimes suppliers take up bulk of your time because most of your components that you're using to deliver your product might be outsourced, might be coming from somewhere else. So it's a very important stakeholder for you to focus on. So this is what a typical interlock looks like for a product management role. Now, if you look at it, there's a lot of questions to consider. And some of these terms are kind of marketing terms, product management, business terms that you might have been exposed to. Others you might not have been exposed to, but I bet you will be eventually in your career path. Irrespective whether you're a product manager or not. You might be an engineering manager. As long as you're in a product company, you'll probably be exposed to some of this, right? So what's my market size? How big is the market? Should I acquire this component or should I build this with my engineering team? What's the timing? Is the innovation that we're trying to build too early, too ahead of its time? And we've seen even companies like Google have failed with several of their launches just because they could not figure out the right timing. It's not always predictable. The most important thing here, though, is can I monetize it, right? That's the core part. Unless you're a non-profit organization, at the end of the day, a product manager is a business leader. At the end of the day, a product manager is a CEO of the product, and so you need to figure out how to make money, how to monetize that, right? Now, here is another structured way of looking at this. While there are a lot of questions, and this is obviously not enough time for us to go in the details to that level, but I wanted to point out maybe 5 core areas. And this is a nice way to, in our opinion, look at product management from a structure perspective. So first area is market analysis. You do a bunch of things in this phase where the key question you're trying to answer is choosing to build. Means, while all these ideas that engineers have come up with, that customers have come up with, that you've come up with, while they seem to be all great ideas, which of those do we want to choose to actually build a solution? It's a very important decision, the most important decision, in fact, in the productizing process. The second one is strategic planning. So you've chosen the idea. Now you have to figure out whether you can actually build a sustainable business around it. Can you develop a profitable business model? Not necessarily this year, maybe 2 years from now, maybe 7 years from now, but you got to have a business plan. So strategy, how big is the market, what's the model, all of that. The third part is product planning. And this is where a lot of requirements management, scenarios, user stories, user experience design, a lot of portfolio management. If you have multiple products in your organization, how do you make the investment bets? So you have 50 engineers and 3 products. How do you divide those engineers up? Right? That's not usually divide by 3. There's a sophisticated process and a lot of tools available like GE, McKinsey, like BCG, which allows you to figure out what's the way to optimize your spend to make the largest amount of revenue. The fourth one is go-to-market. Obviously, the launch plan, the marketing plan, positioning. How are you going to acquire the customers once you've built the product, and then finally sales enablement. This is the channel development. If you have your virtual sales force, you have to work with the channel. If you have your direct sales force, how do you enable them to pitch the right way? How do you do thought leadership things so that you have a buzz in the industry? All of these 5 different areas is essentially what we call the ground reality of what a product manager really needs to focus on and develop enough skills to be able to practice that. Now, we obviously have other people involved, as I mentioned earlier, right? So you have everything from a product manager to what we call a marketing manager or sales manager. So we've given them names here just from the sake of easy to understand. You have project managers, so this is your coordinating Kevin. You have business analysts who are also involved in essentially working with the customer and understanding the context of that and trying to translate that into requirements. And then you obviously have the technology managers. Now there are many others in the product ecosystem in a cross-functional product team, but these are some of the characters that you will probably see a lot more in reality, right? And so it's very important to understand, and this goes back to some of the questions that you guys had asked as well, is what's the difference between a project manager and a product manager, a business analyst and a product manager. So I'll try to address some of those in the next 1 or 2 slides, and then maybe take a more detailed discussion if continued interest is still there. But typically these are different roles, and they coexist in an organization. So if you look at a typical development cycle, you obviously have an idea, you develop a plan, you get approvals on the plan, you start developing, you start testing, you start doing quality assurance on it, and then you kind of do launch and so on and so forth, right? So it's very straightforward, typical development plan. Now, across that development plan, if you interlay the productizing process that we talked about, this is how it would look like, right? So the productizing process with the 5 phases of what we just finished talking is very nicely overlaying with a development process, a construction process, an engineering process, right? So this graphic should hopefully give you a perspective on how the two work together. And here are some of the items or some of the tasks at a very high level. Obviously, you cannot summarize everything in one slide, but these are the most important things that kind of happen in each of these development phases. And if you look at the bottom, I've tried to highlight kind of best practices on how people interlock with each other. So in the conceive phase, you have product manager who's taking the lead, but you obviously have a business analyst as well helping with that. So everything from competitive analysis to feasibility analysis to understanding the problem, all of that kind of happens there. And so as you go and progress along, when you get into the development phase, that's where the project manager gets in. All right? So the product manager obviously is involved in this phase. But the product manager is more focused on making sure that the right requirements with the right business context, with the right customer context is being implemented. Whereas the project manager is spending more focus and is more laser focused and spending time on, are things happening with the cross-functional team? Are the dependencies being resolved? Is there a risk involved in the project, right? From a sheer coordination, from a sheer scheduling, from a sheer making sure that the train will actually arrive on time as we had planned originally, right? So that's kind of the crux or the focus of the project manager. And then as you kind of go along, there are different interactions between these roles. Now, in smaller organizations, you don't have these different roles. So it's quite normal and it's quite okay to have a project manager who's also playing the role of a product manager, just because it's a small organization or maybe they didn't have that much of a budget to hire 2 different guys. And so that happens quite a bit as well, which is why I kept on saying focus on the product management role from a context of our discussion, not the title. Because you might have a different title, but you might still be doing product management as long as it fits the structure that we're discussing here. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of perspective on how the different teams interlock with each other, right? Now, the question that I think a couple of you already asked, and I know some of you asked here as well. Vijay, Vijay asked that question. Satyam asked the question. A couple of you asked the question. So let me kind of walk through this in reality as kind of what we see. So we have a lot of business analysts. We have a lot of project managers. We also have this notion of associate product managers, which is a fancy way of saying junior product managers, but I guess the word junior is not very uplifting from a personal ego perspective. So we call it associate, but it pretty much means the same thing. And then you have technical product managers. Those are more technology focused, not so much business focused of the product cycle. So all of these roles and many other titles and many other roles, they all become the starting block for you to become a product manager. A product manager, when I say a product manager, is in a true sense going and orchestrating the entire productizing process, not just requirements management, but what happens before and after that, right? That's kind of the definition here of a product manager. And so this is where it goes, right? So you have senior, PM who becomes a senior PM. A senior PM at some point becomes a group PM, a director of PM. A director of PM turns into then a vice president of product management, and then eventually a general manager, head of the business unit, or a CEO of the company, or CEO of the business unit, right? So that's kind of the typical career path. And again, time and time again, we've seen this happen across the world in a very predictable fashion. This is what happens. Now, the ground reality on India is a little bit different in the sense that the path is still remaining the same, but we haven't seen as much success stories yet to have a lot of vice presidents of product management. That's not a function of not having those career paths. It partly could be. I think it's more of a function of the maturity of the function itself and how long has the industry had these roles in reality for them to mature to that level, right? So however, there are several vice presidents for product management in India that I've come across in the last 14 months that I've spent time in India. And so this is definitely happening and happening very fast, by the way, changing very fast here in India as well. Now, if you look at the functional difference across these roles, in the first bucket, the business analyst bucket, the project management bucket, TPM bucket, you are essentially owning a module of the product, right? And so when I say the module of the product, if I go back to the framework, the productizing process, if you will, it is one of these modules that we mean, right? So you might be in charge of the market analysis of how big the market is. You might be in charge of competitive analysis. You might be in charge of requirements management. That is one such module of the entire productizing process, right? And that's kind of what we mean by a module owner from a structure perspective as to what that role would do. So going back, the next one is you obviously own the features. You essentially own the roadmap. You essentially decide what's going to go in the next release and the release after, right? So you're making business decisions about the particular product, including the roadmap, right? So that's where a typical product management is different than a project manager or a business analyst, where they might not have the full authority to make the decision on what gets in. And what's considered what we call a minimally viable product, right? Or release 1, release 2, that's customer facing. As you go into a senior product manager, you're now getting into product P&L discussion, right? Pricing, packaging, elements of it, at least assisting in that, if not owning it fully. And as you go more mature, making business decisions, should we use this component from vendor 1 versus that component in vendor 2, and what is the financial ramifications of each one. So you get into the more P&L side, profit and loss, more financial analysis side. In a group PM, you also start making the distinction of what we call a product line owner. So you might have more than one related products or adjacent products that you're managing. As a director, you start getting into more portfolio. So you have an entire portfolio of products that you are potentially managing. Obviously, you have a whole business unit. In a large company, you have usually multiple business units. So you're now the head of that business unit, if you will. And obviously then you become the CEO or the general manager. Now, if you look at so that's the career path that we see, and this is what we work with a lot of organizations. We've now done work with about 40 organizations, very large-scale organizations, MNCs, $1 billion of revenue or higher, as well as mid-size, funded startups in India. And this is the process we're trying to put together to standardize the role and the map of what they do from an HR perspective. So the other thing that's important when you look at career path is the people management side. And fortunately or unfortunately, people management is not a huge priority or a sign of seniority when it comes to product management. In fact, I know several product managers who were my peers at vice president level who decided that they did not want to have people management. Sorry, they did not want to have people management because at the end of the day, the fun is in managing products more so than managing people. And that's not a sign that that they're any less senior than the guy who's managing people, right? So this is one thing that you have to unlearn from the Indian context, that just because you don't have people reporting to you, that doesn't mean that you are any less important, as long as you're making the right business decisions for the product. So people management usually gets introduced at a group or a director level, and then obviously you go all the way up, and when you become a GM, you have a cross-functional team. So you're managing technology guys, you're managing product managers, you're managing marketing managers, the whole cross-functional team. So this is how I would characterize as the kind of career path that one should be looking at and mapping out their own processes to kind of where they are and where they probably need to get to and what they need to do. Now, if you look at the hiring manager perspective, which is kind of like saying, look, if you slice open a product manager from a role perspective, anybody who's playing the role of a product manager, what would you find, right? If you dissect one of those guys, what do you find? There are three things that you find. And this is a perspective for every hiring manager who's looking at hiring product managers across the world. This is the same for India, this is the same for US, this is the same for just about anywhere else. The three parts are first, soft skills, very important, right? So when I say soft skills, I'm talking about stakeholder management. How do you convince a cross-functional team on your idea, on your requirements, on your vision, especially when they do not report to you? Now that's harder to actually make it happen than it sounds on surface. I mean, you're like the CEO of the company and yet nobody reports into you. That's kind of funny, isn't it? And so you have to be able to develop what we call the influence. In fact, one of the things that we've kind of championed is this concept of influentiality index, which is a scientific way of saying what is your score at any point in time, which we call II, influentiality index, that dictates whether you'll be able to successfully sell your idea or not. It doesn't matter how good or bad the idea is. If you do not have the influence around your stakeholders, around your cross-functional teams, around your peers, you're not going to get ahead. You're not going to get them convinced. You're not going to make any progress. Very important skill, right? Passion. This is something that, in my personal opinion, as a hiring manager, this is the first thing I look for. A product manager needs to be absolutely passionate about solving that problem, about doing something in that space, right? Otherwise, you'll not be very effective. So communication skills, presentation skills, and by presentation I mean not just writing great PowerPoints, but also the whole storytelling side of it. How do you pitch? How do you present? Very important. The second part is what we kind of looked at that diagram, if you remember a few minutes ago, which is the functional skills, right? Do you know how to do market research? There are 14 different methodologies and formal ways of doing market research. Some are discovery related, some are validation related. How do you do that? What are the different techniques? What are the best practices? How do you build product strategy? How do you build a business plan? What are different aspects of doing usability design? Right. So all of these are functional skills that you just need to equip yourself with, and it's actually not that hard to acquire, as we've seen now in the last year and a half, that a lot of engineering folks, a lot of technology background guys, a lot of people who are just strongly aspiring to become a product manager can actually pick this skill up through MBAs, through workshops, through reading books, through just plain old surfing Google. I mean, sometimes Google is the best teacher. There's everything that you ever need is already out there. So this is highly doable. And the last part is the domain expertise, which is do you understand the market problems of the customers in that domain? Do you come from a online? Do you come from a consumer background? Do you come from a telco background? And so on and so forth. So when you're looking for a PM, there are three things that everybody is looking for. Now, depending on the manager, depending on the company, there'll be different weights and proportions of what is expected. So that might vary depending on who you're talking and who you're dealing with. But at the end of the day, it's really these three components, right? So so with that, let me take a quick pause and see if I can answer a few questions that you guys might have asked. Okay, so the first one was from Ravi. What is the entry level to become a product manager and what levels one has to cross? I think we've answered this one. Let me know, Ravi, if you need more details, but I think we pretty much answered that in that slide. Second one is also from Ravi. How will a product manager be different than a business analyst? So I think we've covered this. Again, the business analyst is, in my opinion, a subset of what a product manager does. Right? So a business analyst is actually a stepping stone, a great stepping stone actually, to become a full-fledged product manager. Next question is from Satyam. In order to become a product manager, what is the most useful educational background? Okay, so this is a great question. Let me see if I have a slide on this, because a lot of people are obviously, asking, how do we get started? What do we do next? So let me throw a few resources for you here. So there are a lot of short-term programs. Some of them that you can look up here in Berkeley runs a very good program. If you happen to be having access to US, if you don't, there's a lot of programs now available in India. Adaptive is doing a lot of workshops in this space where we have 2-day workshops. Again, getting the same US-based certification that's now available in India. There are a lot of online programs available. If you do a quick Google search, you'll find some of them as well. If you're more interested in a kind of an MBA program or more of a longer-term diploma program, one such program is Foster School that offers a very good 18-month program. It's actually a program that's more dedicated to technology professionals as opposed to a generic butter spread, one-size-fits-all type of MBA programs, which is what we see mostly in India these days. They're very good MBA programs, but they're kind of more general purpose as opposed to being something more specific for the technology or for the product space. There's a new institute that's actually starting up in India as well called the Product Leadership Institute, and they're rolling out a 15-month executive postgraduate diploma in product leadership. So see, these are some of the options you have. Obviously, Google is your best friend. That's the best option in some cases. Here are some books that I would recommend. Greg Garci is a very good author. He's a practitioner himself. He's written a very good book called Take Charge, Product Management. You can find that on Amazon or Flipkart. And then the other one is that I like is from Rich. Rich is a Silicon Valley guy. Again, a hardcore product manager himself as a practitioner, as opposed to being an academician. He's actually done this before. And he's written a very good book, Lessons from the Silicon Valley, The Art of Product Management. So these are some of the resources for you to get started in terms of where you could do. So that's kind of hopefully that answers your question, Satyam. The next one is from Vijay. How can one identify the career path as in wherein to go on the technical side or the management side? So the decision around should you continue on a technical path versus a business path is obviously a personal decision, and it's very hard for me to answer that generically unless I get a chance to interact with you one-on-one. But what I would recommend is that for what worked for me is that while I was a hardcore techie, I was a director of engineering before I jumped over and became a product manager. There's always this drive and passion that drove me, which says, look, I want to build great products, but I want to know if I am building the right things. So building things right is important. But am I building the right things? And the second question intrigued my mind a lot more than the first one. And so to me, I would ask that question that you should ask that yourself as to what do you enjoy more? Do you want to be in the technology architecture role? And there's a lot of options, a lot of great career paths, obviously, in that space as well. But if the intriguing thing to you is, look, I want to build something that's kind of new, innovative. Perhaps I want to focus more on solving some unsolved problems in the market, where technology is just merely a tool for me to get that done. Then that's more thinking on the business side. That's more thinking on the product management side. Now, the good news about product management is that you don't have to become just purely a business guy. Your technology background is actually highly, highly leverageable when you become a product manager. And that's the beauty about a technology guy becoming a product manager, because you don't necessarily, I mean, yes, you give up coding. I hope you don't code when you become a product manager. That's generally just considered a bad practice. But that put aside, even if you don't code, you're still very grounded in the technology world. The trends in the macro, things available to you to build upon, right? So that strength of yours is still leverageable in a product management role, especially if you're still in the technology industry. Although a product manager, once you become one, can certainly cross industries as well. You don't have to be in a particular industry, because domain expertise is one thing. You can also acquire domain expertise by going into another domain, as long as you have the other two sides, the skills, soft skills, and the functional skills very well. Right? So hopefully that gives you a little bit of clarity, Vijay. The next one is from Sujata. What's the difference between a project management and product management? I think we covered this one. Again, one is more tactical. The other one is more strategic, is another way of looking at it. They're both important roles, don't get me wrong. But it's just the purview of what you want to influence. Right? That's the difference between a project and a product manager. Do product managers need to be technical, is a question from Satyam. So I would say yes, especially if you're in India. A lot of product managers are expected to come from the domain expertise. But as you move across the career path ladder, it becomes less important. So it might be necessary or not necessary. It might be helpful initially, but it's not necessarily a prerequisite. A lot of people come from pure, straightforward art, science, cultural, philosophical, music backgrounds, and have become great product managers. So technology is not a necessity, but it certainly helps in the early stage of the career path. The next question is from Deepak. How many CPM, certified product managers, would be in India? Okay, this is a great question. This is something we can give you insights, because we've started doing the certification. We're the accredited partner of AIPMM since the last 9 months or so for the first time in India. And I would say there are at least 300 to 400 such product managers that I know of which are certified. There are probably about 30,000 of them worldwide in 80 different countries, because AIPMM has been around for about 18 years now, and so it's certainly a long body. It's like your PMI Institute, Project Management Institute, except that these guys are more focused on product management. So that's kind of the statistic. But it's quickly growing. We're seeing a very steady state of people coming and approaching us to get certification here in India. Okay, so next question is from Rajiv. The question is bugging you. What's the process of transitioning from being a business analyst or a project manager? Okay, so I think that we covered this one for you, Rajiv. Essentially, a business analyst and a project manager is a stepping stone to become kind of a product owner, especially in the agile world, to eventually becoming a product manager. So this is a great career path move for those who are already a project manager, a business analyst, to then eventually get more on the business side, take a more broader responsibility, if you will, and a broader scope across all the 5 functions, right? Market analysis, strategic planning, product planning, go-to-market, and sales enablement. So that's the definition of the difference, if you will. Okay, next question is from Santosh. Presentation is going great. Okay, thank you. Let me know how an IT guy with around 3 years experience in software product company being in a customer interaction would update himself on product management. So I guess, again, this slide that we have right now for you would be a good one, Santosh. You can start reading up on it. You know, the beauty about being or the beauty about wanting to get into product management is that you can actually start practicing product management without getting the title. Now, this is the part that excites me the most. No other function in this world that I know of can you actually pretend to become or start applying yourself to become that role without you stepping in that role. Here you can. So if you're an engineering manager, if you're an architect, if you're a project manager, start taking some of interest in some of these things. Competitive analysis, pick a small win-loss analysis. Pick maybe 1 quarter of doing survey and market research in certain segments. You can start doing these things while you are in your current role to get a feel for what it takes to become a product manager, and more importantly, communicate this message back to your management team to say, look, hey, look, this is where I want to go, and this is what I've started doing already. It will pave the path for you to become a product manager in your own organization very easy, right? So this is something that you don't have to wait for some magic moments to happen. You certainly don't need an MBA. You certainly don't need some degree to practice this. In fact, we did a statistics, and we're running out of time, so I cannot show you that statistics. I'll give you the link. In fact, let me put that link up for you. So if you want to learn more about, the statistics, almost 53% of the people who we interviewed in India when we did the survey that was released at NASSCOM, and the link for that is on your screen right now, so you should be able to download the report. About 53% of them actually did not have an MBA. And the other 40-some% had some kind of a master's degree, but not necessarily an MBA. So statistics like this that we've kind of captured from you guys when we did our first annual research is available in that report. In fact, I would strongly encourage all of you to take the 2012 survey that has just launched last week. Truly appreciate if you guys could actually take the survey and give us the inputs. So as a token of appreciation, you'll obviously get the full report back where you'll see what the community results are as an aggregate. But certainly request you to take some time, take the survey, because this allows us to baseline even more accurately, this growing ecosystem of product management in India as to how are we doing. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question, Santosh. Ramesh Rajamani, I have a product developed now. How can I target the customers? Well, that's kind of a little bit of the cart before the horse, isn't it? Because you really want to first focus on the real problems customers are facing before you go jump in and start the product development. Now, if you already have developed the product, obviously you would have had something in mind. So now it's a force-fitting exercise for you, unfortunately. Not to say that it could not become successful, but the success of probability of success is very low when you do the reverse here, right? The next question is from Sam. What best practices should be followed by product manager to promote the product? So again, I think we've covered this as part of the go-to-market. If you look at the product management, the productizing process, and by the way, I can send you that little one-pager which describes the entire process. If you drop a note to us, to me, offline, I'll send you the graphic as well. But that will explain to you very well. The next question is, you mentioned about BA, PM, APM as the first block, but nowhere mentioned SC, S engineers, sales engineers. Do you mean software engineers do not generate? No. So that's not what I meant. In fact, software engineers are the direct path of becoming a product manager. Yes, absolutely. So in fact, the statistics show that QA, quality assurance guys, are a lot more closer to the skill set than development engineers, development software engineers, interestingly enough, right? But absolutely, the engineering crowd is also a direct cusp for transformation for you to become a product manager. In fact, in India, the statistics are very high. When we ask the question, how many of you consider yourself technical or highly technical, almost 97%, 97% of them answered the question technical or highly technical, right? So that's a testimony to what your question is. So absolutely, yes, software engineers are a direct path to become a product manager. The next question is from Ramesh. How do you analyze the market for specific product? Do you have any tools? Yes, many tools available. Market research is the most fun part of being a product manager, actually. And so what happens is you get to understand the different aspects, the different problems that they're facing, different alternatives that they're using today, right? Just because they have a solution doesn't mean that that solution is actually delighting them today. And this is the important part for a product manager to understand. That as an engineer, we always want to stay focused on invention. Can I do something cool? Can I do something new? Can I do something never ever done before? Can I invent something? As a product manager, your focus needs to be shifted from invention to innovation, because innovation is something that you can do even with something that's already done, but you're doing it in a different way, right? So you could argue a lot of the products which are very successful in the marketplace today are not necessarily inventive, right? But they're highly innovative because what they've tried to do is figure out the right set of feature sets with the right set of user experience and focus on the right set of customers to delight them. And that causes value to be built. So it's very important to do that. So there's a lot of tools, a lot of discovery tools, a lot of market research tools. Again, I can talk offline, Ramesh, if you send me a note, and I can send you more details. Next question is from Swapnil. Being new joining the organization with already mature products, what can be the opportunities to, so actually, existing products, a company who has mature products is also a great way to manage the life cycle of the existing product, because that's also product management. Product management doesn't always mean you're building something new from scratch. In fact, sometimes it is harder to go from $1 million of revenue in a product to 10 million than it is to go from zero to 1 million, right? So it requires a little bit of different tact. The product management process remains identical. So product management is even more so important, I would argue, for an existing product to apply the right set of roadmap, to apply the right set of feature prioritization, because in an existing product you have many customers potentially, and they're all asking for competing things that you want to go put in your roadmap, but you only have so much bandwidth. You only have so much engineering capacity. So how do you make the prioritization? How do you say no? I mean, these are all very difficult things and very challenging things to do. So absolutely, Swapnil, you can you bet you can do very practice product management a lot in existing products as well. How can a product manager? The next question is from Joseph. How a product manager can convince the higher management about product management requirements. Okay, so so this is a tough one to answer in one line because there's a lot of factors involved in it. I'll tell you, if I had to answer this in one line, the number one reason, in my opinion, why product managers cannot convince their upper management about their ideas is because they do not have, one, the functional skills necessary to speak the same terminology, to speak the same language as the management team is speaking, and number two, they have not built their influentiality index, the II. So if you have not built your credibility, if you have not built your influence, then it almost doesn't matter how good your idea is. People are going to take it very lightly. So I would first recommend you build your influentiality index in the organization before you go pitch bigger projects or bigger business plans to your management team. So I don't know if I answered your question fully, but it's a very open-ended question, Joseph. So send me a note afterwards, and maybe I can spend more time offline. Okay, next question is from Rajiv. Do you have to travel to U.S. to take the certification for product management? No, no. So that's good news, right? So you don't have to go to U.S. anymore to take the certification for product management. It's now available in India because they've accredited us to be able to take the test on their behalf. So you can certainly do that in India. In fact, a lot of people have started doing that here in Bangalore, Hyderabad, Chennai, and Delhi area as well. Okay, so next question from Manish. I asked my organization for the product management profile, but this year they have not offered it. Is there any specific requirement for domain background? Again, I think there are three things, right? So soft skills, functional skills, domain expertise. Maybe you're good on domain, maybe you're good on soft skills, but maybe you're not good on the functional skills part. So I would recommend you take a look at that and build a career path or build a plan for yourself to get to that point, and then maybe try again. Next one is from Hemant. Where do you see how application lifecycle management tools in the support role? They're very complementary. In fact, the product management process that we talked about, there are lots of tools. On the usability side, you have several tools like Azure, like Balsamiq, even your plain old PowerPoint, Excel. If you look at requirements management, there's a lot of different tools available there. Again, product like Accept, like 360. There's a product in India called Product Office. So there's a lot of different tools available to do this. Application lifecycle is again helping orchestrate or automate this process. So absolutely complementary to the role of a product manager. Great question, Hemant. Kaushal, does an MBA in product management role need to further to PG, postgraduate diploma in product leadership or product certification to excel in this role? So so the short answer is yes, Kaushal. Of course, when you learn something that's more actionable, that's more relevant to what you do or what you want to do, it is always helpful. But I want to give one caution to everybody, and maybe I'm very unpopular in saying this, is just because you're certified, just because you have an MBA badge from some university XYZ, doesn't mean that you are actually, mean that you actually can do this job, right? So I think people sometimes in India overemphasize this whole badge phenomenon, that I'm an MBA from XYZ or I'm certified on this, that. I think it's important to get that badge, but it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. What's more important at the end of the day is your functional skills necessary to perform that role. I mean, do you know how to do pricing? Do you know how to figure out product strategy? Do you know how to understand customers? Do you know how the listening skills to interpret the requirements? But at the end of the day, all those are very important. Although learning about these in a more structured way always helps, and it certainly accelerates that. You can always learn through Google. You can always learn through making mistakes, but obviously it's going to be a longer path to learn the same amount that you might be able to learn in a shorter amount of time, right? So that's kind of the short answer. The next question is from Deepak. What is the credibility of certification, CPM? So the credibility is as high as any other certificate, because this is the only certification that's given by an independent board called AIPMM. It stands for Association of International Product Marketing Managers. So it's the only one available. Now there are a lot of other so-called certifications available or delivered by individual trainers, and so in my opinion, those are more memory retention tests. It's like a quiz. I teach you something, and then at the end of what I teach you, I'm going to ask you 20 questions, and of course you're going to know because I just taught you those 20 things. So in my personal opinion, those are not certifications. Those are more quizzes, more of a, that yes, you were there. But this is more of an industry agnostic, a trainer agnostic board certification. So yes, it's the only one that I know of that's credible in the world. The next one is from Yogesh Jain. What's the minimum qualification required for the certification? So I think the qualification is more so is that are you in a product company? Do you have exposure of interacting with a product management process? Even if you're not a product manager today, do you have the appetite? Do you have the exposure? I think you need to have 4 years of experience of work experience. But if you go to the site aipmm.com, www.aipmm.com, you'll learn a lot more about the certification, the community around the world, and a lot of resources available. So certainly take a look at them. Next question is from Mohan. I have strong technical experience for 12 years and 4 years in project management. Should I consider? Yes. Short answer is yes. Absolutely. Product management certainly can build upon your project management experience, your business analyst experience. Next question is from Saeed. What's important when product managers are recruited? So I think we answered this one again. 3 things: functional skills, soft skills, and domain expertise. So and so each one will have a different variation of it as to what they expect. Next question is from Ravi. Ravi is asking, how much does the certification cost? Okay, so let's not get into any specific company or specific certification type of discussion here. Let's try to keep it very neutral. But if you go to AIPMM site, you'll find out all the details. Or if you go to adaptivemarketing.in, you'll get all the details there. Yeah. So thanks, Ravi. Rajiv is asking, project management certification has become a commodity. Is there a value for? Yeah, so I actually hear this a lot. Obviously, when you have 3 lakh people certified on certain thing, of course it becomes a commodity because you and everybody around you also has the same certification. So CPM, Certified Product Manager, is a little bit more different because it's very elite. And certainly for Asia, this is way far from being commoditized. Maybe 10 years from now, we'll have a lot of CPMs in India, and I hope so. But certainly not the case right now. It's fairly elite at the moment, and probably hence will enjoy the eliteness for at least a few years. Next question is from, or more of a comment, Mr. Mahavir Shankar. Great presentation, Pinkesh. Looking more. Okay, great. So, hey, thanks for the comments, and I look forward to syncing up with you. So, let me kind of put up my contact info as well. So, feel free to email me or get connected with me on LinkedIn. Would love to interact and learn more. Next question is from Mahesh. Would there be a thumb rule on how you break up your budget between research, build, and go to market? Oh, great question. Excellent question. It varies again from company to company, but in the companies that I have worked with, and I've been in IBM through 3 different startups that I've been in the US, they got all acquired. So I've been in large companies, I've been in smaller companies, and larger companies have a very straightforward rule, which is roughly about 40% of the available budget. And when I say available budget, not counting the engineering budget, but minus the engineering budget, the whole launch budget, 40% of them is kind of used in research, validation, secondary research like Gartner reports and things like that, and 60% is used in go-to-market, and specifically in go-to-market launch plans, marketing plans, and all of that, because usually that's more costly because you have to use a lot of external agencies and you're relying on a lot of external media spend. So it's usually 40-60. Right? So hopefully that helps. But again, it varies again from company to company. The next question is from Ravi. U.S. is the place where most of the products are developed, and India is mostly the services industry. So how much does it help here? So this is actually changing quite rapidly, Ravi. While we are nowhere close to the maturity of what we see in the U.S., where there are thousands and thousands of product companies, and here we have thousands of professionals working in a IT services company, perhaps, the Wipros, the Infosys, the TCS, and the likes of it. So you can't compare the two. However, I can say that there are lots of MNCs. I know of at least 80 of them personally, and there are about 1,200 such MNCs. The Googles, the Yahoos, the Informaticas, the Alcatel-Lucents, the Ericssons, the McAfees of the world, who are aggressively building their product management portfolio, product management teams here in India. So there's lots of activity in those pockets. There's also lots of activity in the startup phase, because at the end of the day, when you're a product startup, the most important thing for a product is a product manager, and it's one of the early founders that you got to have. So a lot of product startups are also investing in product management, although they might not formally be calling it a product management. They might be calling it CTO, might be calling it co-founder, but essentially that's the skill that they're looking for. Ramnath has a question. Great webinar. Thank you. My query is, why do you feel India, although having so good talent, have not made substantial mark in inventing products? So, this is a topic in itself, Ramnath, and I wish we can probably, based on the availability, I can try and schedule something with Techgig to do another one on this one, or one of our consultants can do it. But boy, this is a big topic. So we see 5 different drivers of why this has not taken off in the past, and we've written a research note on why in the next few years, very quick near future, there are 5 macro drivers on why product management is going to exponentially shoot up in India. So we're in a very changing time right now, and it might not have happened in the past because, again, it's a maturity issue, right? So first we did low-cost labor, QA, then we did some development, then we did some architecture work, even if you look at the engineering cycle, and now we're going to just getting ready to do business stuff. So it's a matter of maturity, but even services companies, I tell you, several of them who are progressive are actually investing in product management in this space, because they're, at the end of the day, they're serving other product companies in the U.S. So this is and there's a lot of drivers for that. 5 of them are fairly macro, and again, that probably is a whole set of discussion we can arrange for again. But great question. Next one is from Dave Raj. Though I was a product manager managing 3 products in a company with strong domain and functional skills, but not exposed to P&L. How do we get P&L? So P&L skills. I mean, you can pick up a book, honestly, if that's all you care for. And if you believe you have all the necessary functional skills that a global product manager should have, let me go back to that slide. So from your reference perspective, that you're realizing what we're talking at the same thing. I mean, if you believe that the rest of the functional skills are fairly straightforward for you and you've already mastered it, then it's a matter of just picking up a book. There are several good books. I would look for the title, Finance for non-finance guys, right, or Finance for engineers. There's a lot of good Google material. Obviously, we covered this in one of our workshops, but you can easily find this and learn yourself in a book, because P&L is actually fairly straightforward. It's more mathematical, it's more logic-driven, and if you're an engineering guy or if you're a technology-driven guy, you'll pick this up very quickly. So that's that. Okay, so just looking at the time now, because we have a few more questions. Why don't we address them real quick? So, is a product manager the same as an entrepreneur? Is a question from Harpreet Singh. During market analysis, you can come across solutions, ideas that don't apply to your current domain, or should you drop those ideas? So I think there are 2 questions. The first question is yes, but if you ask in the reverse way. An entrepreneur is a product manager, but doesn't mean that a product manager is an entrepreneur, right? And the reason I say that is that there is the whole notion of intrapreneur. So if you are a head of a product division in a large company, say IBM, you are still responsible for influencing the growth of that product. You're still responsible and accountable for the overall strategy. And so in that sense, you're like the CEO. But you're the intrapreneur. You're doing it for the company, not necessarily doing it for yourself. And so that's the difference between an intrapreneur and an entrepreneur. So if you flip your question, the answer is yes. Every entrepreneur, on the other hand, has to be a product manager. Whether he knows it or not, whether he is aware of that or not, but every entrepreneur, in my opinion, is a product manager, because you have to think about customers. You have to think about context of the business. You have to think about, the roadmap. You have to think about how are you going to build and what priority you're going to build in. So all of that is product management. Next question from Ilangovan Bala Subramaniam. What are the key KPIs to measure Vice President of Product Management? Okay, boy, this is a big one again. So again, drop me a note offline if you want to, and I can share with you what I was being measured at when I was the vice president in several of these companies as a role. But at the end of the day, it's a combination of managing the P&L of the product, the portfolio, the business unit, but also grooming and managing your product managers. That's a very important KPI for a vice president level guy, because you can't bring scale into the organization if you don't have sharp, functional skill, soft skill aware product managers. So you need to really invest in your product managers to groom them, to make them your next generation leaders, and that's a very important part of my KPI, and that's the important KPI for every vice president. Vijay, thanks for the comment. Nice webinar. Thanks for your guidance. Thank you. Good to see you. And the last comment is from A.V. Srinivas. Great presentation. Super. So I know I had to rush through some of these questions, but in interest of time, this is a vast topic. There's a lot of things that we can discuss as well. Obviously, there's not enough time on this webinar, but feel free to explore your mindset. To me, a lot of people think product management is some kind of a black magic. It really is not. It's actually, applying the right set of practices and making it more actionable, applying it to your workplace, whether you're a startup, whether you're a mid-sized company, or even you're a services company. If you want to get nonlinear growth, this is where you kind of start applying some of this. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the moderator. Feel free to follow us on Twitter and Pinterest and LinkedIn. By the way, a lot of this discussion happens on our LinkedIn group, so feel free to join that as well. And there's a lot of such resources, slide decks, all available for free in the open community on SlideShare. So feel free to look around. So with that, back to you, moderator.
Thanks, Pinkesh, for such an informative session. We understood many new concepts and areas of product management and its career path in India. The webinar was a big success. I would also like to thank all participants for attending this webinar and making this so successful. A recording of this webinar will be made available on techgig.com by tomorrow. So once again, thank you all for joining this webinar. Goodbye.